Greetings and good evening. Thank you for joining my talk this evening, and thanks to the IA Cafe for their support, especially Grace Lau and Nihar Sultana, and to Writers College for the opportunity to speak, and also to Professor Rupa Misra for introducing me this evening. Now, this evening, I've got a 45-minute talk, roughly 45 minutes, and I'll delve into the burgeoning field of grassroots AI, its origins and significance and impact. So let me share my screen here and we can get started. So the name of the talk is entitled, What is Grassroots AI and Why Does It Matter? Now, since there is a time constraint, I have a list of topics, actually a larger list than I have time. So I'm not going to go too deep on anything, but I will touch on each one briefly in order to make a case for grassroots AI. And as we move through the slides, you'll see QR codes to excellent links. If you wish to go deeper on what I'm sharing, please have your phone handy. A little bit of housekeeping to start. A few weeks ago, I attended the Information Architecture Conference in the Chief Seattle Public Library in the Chief Seattle City. It's always a pleasure to be amongst my American cousins, especially those who are passionate about how to arrange information for sense making. So I presented on the first day, poster night, a piece of work on how to use AI to mediate asymmetrical information design. And for your information, I'll be sharing a few posters that were also in the room with me and my AI poster or IA poster, as well as some key slides from the conference because they're fresh and relevant to my talk on grassroots AI. And I will be using my notes. So if you see me glancing down, you know that's what I'm doing. I do want to stick to the time limit. So the foundation of any grassroots movement begins with a relationship to the land on which it takes place. So as much as we might feel that we're abstracted and virtual and all about to lose our jobs to artificial intelligence, the last time I checked, the meat suit that I walked around at the public library in downtown Seattle while carrying a long white tube with a rolled up poster inside was a full-on 3D experience that took place on the traditional homelands of the Duwamish peoples. So I begin my talk by giving a big up to all First Peoples that I have met along my journey, and I give thanks for the teachings that First Peoples have shared with me over the past few decades. These are some photos of real Indigenous peoples, most of whom I know and who are living on their really real lands. I show you these because at the conference on poster night, one of the few questions that I got about my poster was, do you know any Indigenous people? So in response to that question, I'm going to say that in addition to acknowledging the land, I also acknowledge the First Peoples that I met along the way. And currently I am camped out in Blackfoot territory near the Montana border. And I give thanks to the First Peoples of Turtle Island for their peace, friendship, and hospitality. Now, in before times, I spent about a decade getting to know many First Nations, peoples and nations and individuals within those nations. I attended various professional and academic conferences, annual grassroots land-based events like workshops, ceremonies, powwows, and even some Sundance gatherings. I first attended as an observer, then as an ally, and now I tend to show up as a treaty artist. And that's me, by the way, with the pale white circle over my pale face and the dollar signs in my eyes. Now, there's a funny story about this picture of me in the top left corner. I'm holding a check for $1 million for the Buffalo Restoration and Food Security Project of the Blackfeet Nation in Montana from the US government. It was a grant to the Blackfeet Nation and the local University of Montana to help them restore the buffalo to Blackfoot territories. As fate would have it, I was in Browning for the annual North American Indian Days in before times, invited by a young settler student who connected me with a Blackfoot counselor. And just after we connected, this counselor told me about the $1 million that would be presented to the Blackfeet people in about an hour by some representatives from the Department of Indian Affairs at the opening of the evening powwow dance competition. Would I mind, he asked, staying behind to man their booth while they collected their check? I was, of course, I said, sure, go ahead, collect your check. So it turns out that one of the representatives from the Washington Bureau of Indian Affairs knew about my interest in information architecture, for this counselor had inquired of her as to what information architecture was. And at one point, this rep turned to me and said that they also offered information architecture services. So since I was a foreigner, and it was clear from that remark that I had been dismissed as being too remote, too obscure, and most certainly probably too grassroots. Surprisingly, it turns out that one can go so deep into the fabric of the two cultures, settlers and First Peoples, excuse me, in search for a common ground, that you end up holding a check for $1 million for a project that was not your own, but is still somehow, it connects you in a profound way to the entire sense-making process of right relationship. So at the bottom right, you can see also another historic event that I was invited to attend on the lands of the Kainai people near Standoff, Lethbridge, Alberta, for their buffalo harvest during their annual EPA, Environmental Protection Agency land-based event. And I marked the occasion by sketching the experience and later doing a painting from it. So you'll see this woman here in the blue dress. Blonde great hair is leaning over the buffalo. They're about to take off the hide of the buffalo with a knife. And here is the painting that I did where she's actually removing the buffalo hide to make buffalo robes from the buffalo. So at this point, you're probably saying, wow, who is this Susan Kosh? So as you can see, I have a range of skills along with a lot of experience in specific domains, which cross over nicely. So please use the QR code to access my website for more information on my tech advisory firm entitled 3 Times Ethical, where I advance technology through deliberate values and positive behaviors. So in 2017, I attended the Information Architecture Conference in Vancouver, Canada, and was blown away by the keynote speech given by Alan Cooper, author of the book, The Inmates Are Running the Asylum, Why High-Tech Products Drive Us Crazy and How to Restore the Sanity. At the end of his talk, Mr. Cooper asked us to consider deeply who we're working for and why. That was about, 7 years ago? So this challenge inspired me, and after some reflection and being so ethical, I decided to start my own company along with a 20% project in 2018. Having taken a vow of poverty in art school, the price for not selling out and pursuing art for art's sake was always some sort of moral high ground, provided, of course, that you could find a job to grind away at while continuing to play the infinite game of making art. I reasoned that I could learn more about the art of arranging social information information, working on my personal passion project than constantly searching for a non-existent remote UX tech job or chasing clients who are not interested in social information architecture and the role that ethics plays in technology. So I created the Two-Row Flow Cultural Commons as a conceptual container for all things related to cultivating right relationship with First Peoples. Now here's the homepage of the placeholder website for the Two-Row Flow Cultural Commons. You can check it out at www.tworowflow.com. And as you can see, the role of the language in the affairs of both settlers and First Peoples is acknowledged. The first thing that's acknowledged on this commons Now, there is also important to note that there's a distinct difference between the finite and the infinite games played by each treaty partner that are similar to the ones that we all play or all experience in our social, economic, political, and financial lives on a daily basis. So in a finite games, they're defined as known players, have fixed rules, and agreed upon objective, whereas an infinite game is defined as known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, and the objective is not to win. The objective is to keep playing the game. So this is a placeholder. So after 7 years of working on this personal project, which I worked on consistently for 2 to 4 hours a day, there suddenly emerged a viable solution to balance out the asymmetrical information between settlers and First Peoples. And it emerged in the form of artificial intelligence in general and small language models specifically. So this quote again says, when you pit, it goes a little deeper, when you pit a finite player against a finite player, the system is stable. And when you pit an infinite player against an infinite player, it's also stable. The problems arise, however, when you fit a finite player against an infinite player. The infinite player is playing to win, and the finite player is playing just to keep playing. As a result, they will make very different strategic choices. So this is a screenshot for the peacemakerai.net website. Feel free, you can also visit there at www. If you want to learn more about my project. So the biggest lesson that I've learned from First Peoples over the past decade is the importance of cultivating what is known as right relationship with all things. And in this photo, we see a Blackfoot woman, a friend of mine named Rebecca Many Gray Horses, who I first met on a settler job site over a decade ago. She's standing here beside the teepee that belonged to her 4 times great-great-grandfather, Chief Red Crow. And it's painted with the design of Chief Red Crow, who signed the Treaty 7 agreement with European settlers in the late 1800s. So over the last decade, I've learned a lot about Rebecca's famous ancestor, as well as her Blackfoot culture. Rebecca is known as a knowledge keeper, and she often speaks at the Galt Museum in Lethbridge, Alberta, on various topics related to her culture. Now, ironically, I also have an ancestor who was famous and who lived around the same time. That's the real irony. So my ancestor did not, of course, live in Blackfoot territory on Turtle Island, but rather in Europe, in Bavaria, Germany. Dr. Robert Herbert Koch is my 4-time great-great-great-grandfather. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work in tuberculosis viruses and is considered to be the father of modern medicine. So take note of the word modern medicine. So I was impressed by this little tidbit of knowledge. It took me decades to confirm and fact check it. So deep are the secrets amongst my family, especially the German side, well, also the settler Canadian side, the Scottish side, but anyhow, that I had to include my grandfather in a poster that I presented in 2021, the Virtual Information Architecture Conference, in an effort to make sense of the world at that point in time. So this poster was about the state of the two-row flow commons in the time of COVID. Sadly, it did not appeal to the online audience that evening. In fact, I've never seen a group of people less interested in my work on mapping alternative cultures of medicine through history while referencing a current biological social event. Apparently, there was only one form of medicine that counted in that online space, and that was, you guessed it, modern medicine. The medicine of my great-grandfather. Ouch. And since I've always identified as a European and feel that for the most part I am a stranger in a strange land, camped out on or in a British colony on stolen lands of the Blackfoot peoples, this action didn't really faze me too much. But this is my poster for IAC 2024. It was on display at the in-person event at the Seattle Public Library last month. This time my poster was hard to escape. It was in a small room on a golden easel in front of a wonderful architectural window with good lighting overhead. Since it also dealt with artificial intelligence, and that is a thing even if the desire to balance out asymmetrical information is not, my poster attracted some attention. Two favorite words used to describe my work that evening were fresh and photogenic. So naturally, my work is influenced by my first calling as a visual artist, my training at the Emily Carr College of Art and Design, which is now a university in British Columbia, Canada. This training will set me up for success in this domain because after 5 years of formal studies in art and new media, I was prepared for the challenge of designing intelligent information landscapes. In these times, now, as far back as 1988, almost 4 decades ago, I was already tracking information architecture, thanks to the MIT Press and their magazine, Leonardo, which is still active, by the way. And it was there that I encountered a few lines on information that really rocked my world and led to a strange desire to work and play with information. So the quote was, today, quote, many of these artists are more interested in managing information or arranging information than they are in formulating unique forms of individual expression. So now let's zoom out a bit so I can share a few things that I've learned over the past 4 decades at the intersection of art, business, and technology in my pursuit of becoming a practitioner of information architecture. Of course, desire is a given. My passion for work fuels the ideas and concepts that keep me awake at night. Here are my top 3 takeaways. As an artist, being comfortable with chaos is a must. Making a mess and creating something from it, or cleaning up a mess that someone else made with their information in whatever form it presents, and dealing with all the chaos associated with the rearranging of that information are similar in kind. I've also learned to always seek the deep beauty of a thing and not just be attracted to the surface of it. As the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie said to the United Nations in 1963, when he spoke about war and the peaceful survival of mankind, quote, until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, there will always be war. And last but not least, I advise you, especially if you're new to this field, to play the infinite game. Being an artist at heart and a total fool for information, architecture, or just information, always love information. I was thrilled to see these 2 posters at the IAC conference created by tech students from my old art school. School, of course, is now a university. It was named after a British painter, a woman known as Emily Carr, who also camped out on Indigenous lands, specifically on those of the unceded Pacific West Coast Indigenous peoples, where she painted under the influence of Indigenous culture. So this poster from the Emily Carr students is focused on decolonizing knowledge systems, which could be code for cultivating right relationship. My desire to decolonize AI is total. So I love to see this work, this considered work by young tech students who are sort of alumni, I guess. Now, the other poster was on fake news and misinformation. And while our terms differ, as my poster is focused on the concept of asymmetrical information by design and not on the variations of a theme known as mis, mal, or disinformation. Both of our posters are aligned on the importance of ethics in stewarding technology. So whether it's life or death, war or peace, social information and the way that it is architected matters. Now, here's a quote about the role of the artist in all this. As the antenna of the race, I think it was Proust who said that, McLuhan saw that the artist is as the person who invents the means to bridge between biological inheritance and the environments created by technological innovation. End quote. That was around 1988. So here, ironically, is the first slide of my pitch to the founder of personal.ai on my Peacemaker AI.net project. And it's entitled Bridging the Divide, Leveraging Personal Language Models, or also known as Small Language Models, to cultivate right relationship on Turtle Island. And During that pitch to the CEO of Personal.ai, Suman Kanyuganti, I explained the concept to him behind peacemakerai.net. I explained how I saw using Personal.ai as a viable solution to cultivating right relationship with First Peoples. So at Peacemaker AI, Indigenous thought leaders will train their own AI on their ways, customs, and laws in accordance with treaty agreements, and settlers can query their AIs with the intent of having a mediated conversation with an Indigenous trained Peacemaker AI. So this will reduce the cognitive load of Indigenous thought leaders specifically, and First Peoples in general, who have better things to do with their time than constantly having to update and educate settlers whose respective governments have failed to do so on their ways, customs, and laws in order to achieve better understanding. The 4 groups that would be invited to participate in training their own AIs include Indigenous academics, professionals, creatives, and grassroots thought leaders. Now, I call myself a social information architect because I soon discovered or realized that the problem that I was trying to solve with technology was a seemingly impossible one. Nobody believed that it could be solved unless, of course, First Peoples were guiding and governing the solution. This type of project, like other wicked social problems, including race, religion, politics, war, hunger, and the environment, are social by nature and deeply embedded, therefore, in culture and cultures. And the difference between the 2 forms of information architecture is found in their focus and their inputs. For information architecture in general, the focus is on transactions, while with social IA, art remains a big influence because creativity is an infinite game that everybody wants to play, because the transformation and the ability to get into flow is something that we all desire. Well, not all of us, but most of us, especially young people. So some say that we as humans are here to be creative. Creativity is a process. And you can note the popularity of TikTok and its recent ban in the United States, how that affects young creatives in the West, which leads me to ask that old philosophical question: what is art? Here is one of the most cosmic definitions that I know, which is based on a formula, which reads that time factored by energy equals art. So everything shaped by time is art. And while that quote on art stands the test of time, the most culturally relevant definition for me is from McLuhan, who said that culture is our business. McLuhan is a Canadian media theorist who wrote the book Laws of Media. He wrote, art at its most significant is an distant early warning system that can always be relied on to tell the old culture what is beginning to happen. Of course, McLuhan is always constantly reminding us of the upsetter role that is played by the artist. After all, is not art everywhere reminding us of this or that a social issue when you dig deep enough? While doing UX research on public transit for an online course offered by an American university, I saw these posters at various bus stops in Lethbridge, Alberta, and did a double take, for they were produced by an artist-run center or a collective. I had to stop and ask myself, is this art or is this UX research? And still, historically, history shows that art and social movements have gone are intertwined, and that really they're very good bedfellows that artists and activists make. So now if we take a look at some recent social movements, here's some examples that took place on the ground, but were tethered by like big red balloons to cloud services of this or that social network. And now, while we can throw various labels and classifications in each one of these movements, I'm sure that all of you will agree that who are attending this talk this evening, thanks again, that depending on your worldview, they include the entire spectrum of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Speaking of ugly, the truckers' protest in Canada got particularly nasty over vaccination mandates. This, in spite of the fact that only a little over 100 years ago, subjects of the British Crown, and Canada is only 150 years, including many British settlers in Canada and America, mock the very idea of vaccinations. At the same time, in Germany, under the watch of my four times great-grandfather, vaccinations were being mandated for the first time. Imagine such division in thinking among Europeans, and both happening at the same time. So yeah, it seems that there is a long, strange history of anti-vaccination movements, but who knew, right? So from kitchen table to global networks, all of these movements have evolved over time and have adopted various forms of media as tools to support their causes. And why, you may ask? Well, as my former instructor, Andreas Rezamini, a professor in Sweden, stated in this slide at the IAC conference on his presentation about politics of classification, making sense is a social process. It is a social process that stands in stark contrast to what I call big tech AI and its relentless desire for transactions over transformation. With big tech, we find the politics of classification and can see the impact that they're having on our societies as a result, for example, of the design of social networks as surveillance platforms. And while most settlers continue to fight over property rights and are at war in Europe or the Middle East for this same reason, First Peoples struggle to retain the memory of their culture. It turns out that memory is a big deal. This was pointed out by a great European author in his book on the Book of Laughter and Forgetting. And this book really influenced me when I was in art school. So I will read this quote. "The first step in liquidating a people is to erase its memory, destroy its books, its culture, its history, and then have someone write new books, manufacture a new culture, invent a new history. Before long, that nation will begin to forget what it is and what it was. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting." Well, many of us may think that the definition of grassroots is assigned to those who are defending the memories of their ancestors. The origin of the word actually lies with American settlers who used the phrase grassroots and boots to indicate that they were connected to the soil of the people. This was indeed only through the soil on the bottom of their boots. So how ironic this relationship must have sounded, or must sound, continue to sound, to First Peoples, who are the original grassroots people of Turtle Island, many of them who have died singing their death song, defending their lands with moccasins pointed straight up to the sky. And while the morphing of land-based social movements into new keywords can be appropriated, it is traced back to the game of semantics and language in Europe, starting with the commons in the 12th century, then the birth of collectives and cooperatives in the 17th century, and then on to the use of grassroots in the early 20th century, by which the 21st century had become fully aligned with Indigenous peoples. Settlers, European settlers, took a fork in the road and became hippies in the 1960s, calling for love over land and dropping into a sort of psychedelic Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole from which many have yet to emerge. And in 2021, First Peoples hit a semantic snag due to the escalating war in the Middle East. They're no longer known as the noble land defenders that they rightfully are, but they have rather been labeled as terrorists. So the search for first principles in technology is not unique to philosophy. All great thinkers do it. In fact, sports coaches play the infinite game, and they'll reason from first principles. The first rules of the football game are the first principles. They govern what you can do and what you can't do. And so I chose to create a commons as an intelligent information landscape in which to cultivate right relationship on Turtle Island. So the concept of the commons represents the oldest form of European land-based cooperation based on creativity, collaboration, and creative thinking. But of course, there were certain people that didn't want us to know about this, and yet another document, agreement signed, whatever, called the Magna Carta. It was that the governments, traders, merchants, corporations want people to forget that they actually have the rights to access the woodlands for fuel and heating. People have the right to access the commons for their own survival. So what are the characteristics of grassroots social movements? Well, to start, they are bottom up and not top down. It means that you start with little or nothing and work your way into the consciousness of the status quo. And you use lots of hashtags to do that if you're on X, which will help to give a broader understanding of what your movement stands for. You do not start out as a Google employee, make 200 grand a year for a few years, and then spin off a cool AI startup and claim that you represent grassroots AI. No, sorry, you represent enterprise AI. At best, as all big tech is enterprise AI. So grassroots AI differs from enterprise AI in the way that those who follow it reason. Grassroots AI is much closer to indigenous ways of thinking and reasoning due to its love of complexity and transcontextual domains. And this is shown in two books by Indigenous authors, one by an Indigenous woman who wrote about Indigenous wisdom and scientific knowledge, while the other by an Indigenous man who studied the domain of European systems thinking and then compared it to the teachings of his Indigenous ancestors from Australia. As Tyson points out in that book, Sand Talk, there is a distinction between European systems thinking and grassroots systems thinking, or thinking. And it is this, that the European systems are complicated as they are tied to machines for the most part and arose in the Industrial Revolution. While, for example, take the plumbing in your house, it is complicated, whereas living systems deal with complexity and multiple contexts at one time, like the role of your gut microbiome in regulating your immune system. So the bottom line, of course, is that when it comes to grassroots thinking, it is the interconnectedness of things, in which First Peoples focus on relationships, kin, and living systems. And the Europeans tend to focus on emergence and the synthesis associated with systems thinking and approaches to sense making. Here's a great quote from a systems thinker and American environmental scientist, educator and writer Donella Meadows. As it relates to systems thinking and the role of a virus in your immune system, her observation is that it takes the right conditions for a virus to flourish. This way of looking at the world, however, is largely ignored by Eurocentric, uber-specialized scientific cultures, which remain for the most part locked into various modes of specialization, linear thinking, in order to play the game of politics with its hard and fast rules in governing for commerce. According to systems thinking, when the conditions are right, the thing will arise. Excuse me. So we have seen this with the rise of generative AI last year. The conditions were perfect for generative AI to emerge in the form of ChatGPT, and it took the world by storm. So now, thanks to this whole artificial intelligence, generative AI, particularly large language models, information architects and UXers are rethinking what they know about algorithms, data, and models of learning. Soon, I hope that the IA community will also add the concept of warm data to their ways of thinking about information, as it helps to distinguish between complicated and complex systems. And since Indigenous ways and worldviews are well versed in peacemaking and treaties, through treaties, they have a brilliant way of bringing together two diverse groups, which is known as two-eyed seeing. And at one point during the process of working on various designs for the Commons, I created a design for an online course called Social UX for Indigenous Youth, in which two-eyed seeing was the framework. And during that process, I managed to find an Indigenous UX designer online who said, quote, "UX is the perfect intersection of media, culture, and technology." Hear, hear. Now, here's a good example of a grassroots thinking that is not enabled by artificial intelligence, as I know yet. It's about food security and the preservation of the elk herds in northern BC. And here's another link to a 45-minute video I did for my YouTube channel. It compares the grassroots thinking from a 2018 paper called Making Kin with the Machines, written by 4 Indigenous new media students in Montreal, Canada, and compares that to the rise of artificial intelligence in South Africa. So you can check that out if you want to go deeper. And on my way to Chief Seattle City for the IAC 24, I picked up the Wired magazine and read this story about the invention of modern AI. So here we are again. Modern art, definitely studied that. Modern medicine, well, have a connection to that. And now we're talking about modern AI. So it's a new term for me, but according to this article, it all began with transformers. Just a note, though, the word modern for Indigenous people is code for something that's informed by typically white supremacy ideologies. So, language. So this transformer thing actually was part of the deep learning architecture developed by Google as proposed in this particular paper, 2017 paper called Attention is All You Really Need. Now, this passage in particular really got my attention as it alerts us to the fact that the way in which we organize information will never be the same. Quote, transformers did not instantly take over the world or even Google. This is 2017. Kaiser recalls that around the time of the paper's publication, Shazier proposed to Google executives to abandon the search index and to train a huge network with transformers, basically to transform how Google organizes information. So think about that one for a second. Which begs the question, if modern AI is in full effect according to Wired and in the form of large language models and enterprise AI, then where did this idea of grassroots AI come from? Well, my research on grassroots AI has surfaced 3 possible locations, and this is the sequence that makes the most sense to me. The concept of grassroots AI emerged from South Africa, from technology students in particular, and has become a thing recently. And if you read this full article, if you want to read it, it basically talks about the rise of grassroots AI amid South Africa's perfect storm of few universities, racial inequalities, and economic disparities. AI students find support in the not so grassroots movement. So you can chew on that one for a while. I'm not sure what it's meant, but ironically, this did take place on the land and not at a university. So the author is a little bit wondering about that. But that's what grassroots is, tied to the land. Another reference on grassroots AI comes from India in the form of a corporate website that offers artificial intelligence services. And if you scan this code, you can be taken to the website and see that they have listed here in their menu, both enterprise and grassroots AI. Excuse me. So in this article on their website, we also see a photo of African tech students and some copy below on ethics. And ironically, the founder of Personal AI was also born and raised in India, as a side note. He studied computer science there as a student. In effect, Suman Ganji represents, in my opinion, the grassroots peoples of India, because his mission is to enable billions of people to train up their own personal AIs. You can read his thesis on memory, which is posted at the personal.ai website. And further research also revealed another region that's involved, and of course that's Europe, which is, obviously had a long history colonizing both India and Africa, and they're calling to regulate modern AI in Europe in order to protect grassroots AI, which here in the West, most people have never heard of. So you can scan and read that article. So next question is, what does or how does grassroots AI differ from enterprise AI? Well, first of all, we know that enterprise or big tech is dominated by big tech, big media, and big governments. We already know this from the history of social networks like Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit, or Facebook, X, and Reddit. But what matters the most when it comes to grassroots AI is it seeks transformation through love and not through transformer technology. So through basically chemical reactions of love, neurotransmitters. So this is a physical, biological thing as opposed to a technology through technology. And of course, they seek profits through transformation with with enterprise AI. And if you want to, again, scan this, that will take you to my talk on comparing grassroots AI arise in Canada and in South Africa. Now, this is another poster from the AIC conference, which helps me try to define grassroots AI to see what category grassroots AI uses the most, which just happens to be, of course, generative AI. So I mapped out these categories here. And while we can see there is an overlap between grassroots AI and enterprise AI when it comes to generative AI, because obviously marketing and salespeople, creative content, everyone's going to use the generative AI. Whereas the other 6 categories are really dedicated to the sphere of enterprise AI. So the reason that generative AI is so perfect for the grassroots people is that it actually is text-based and can be and uses images, audio, and video. So these are, these are the basic tools of any artist, digital artist, content creator, and perfect again for academics, grassroots, professionals, and creatives. It's also built on the model of neural networks, which mimic the structure of the human brain in pattern recognition and synthesis. And since we humans are pattern predictors, we love finding patterns ourselves, and we have an affinity with this type of architecture, this type of technology. So while personal AI is a generative AI model, it is not a large language model. Rather, it is a foundational small language model with the aim of restoring the power of AI to the people. Of course, small businesses and enterprises can use it too, but here we have a technical architecture, particularly that small language models are trained on the data from specific domains. They may lack holistic contextual information from all multiple knowledge domains, but are likely to excel in their chosen domain, which I don't know what more you could ask for if you're running your own securing your own memories, your own information, or that of your business or a small business. I would think it had to be domain specific from the start. The idea that you could get all information into one model in the whole world, and we know clearly that Indigenous peoples are not even considered, it to me is an affront. But with personal AI, we claim that our small language model creates 40 times better experience for the user. If you want to know how that happens, please scan this, and we can set up a time to, I can do a Zoom for you, and we can discuss it, because I believe that personal AI is the ultimate grassroots tool. And I give thanks to the 3 co-founders of personal AI for showing me love on my personal project, Peacemaker AI. For that, I am very grateful, because I do have the objectives of having it powered by personal AI, supported by settlers, and adopted by First Peoples. And remember, as we close, that yes, the minute you have senior objectives obsessing about the short game, the game is lost. This is by Simon Sinek, who is the master of start with why approach to strategic thinking. So finally, what can you do to support grassroots AI should you stumble upon it in your journey? Well, I advise that you practice the law of network effects, that you share your knowledge, expand your networks, and always, always practice compassion and love. So I'm going to thank you for your time. And you can, if you have some questions, you can queue up now, or you can also find me on LinkedIn or on my website, 3timesethical.com. Thanks again for your time.